Hi, everyone, and welcome to How the Wise One Grows. Let's take a moment to settle in and land here together with 3 deep breaths. So, whatever you're doing right now, whether you're walking, maybe you're on a jog, doing the dishes, try to just settle into stillness. And if it feels safe for you, you can gently rest your eyes or soften your gaze at a point in front of you. And notice where your body touches the earth. Noticing how you're held here. And let the head reach towards the sky as the shoulders gently soften down the back. And take a big breath in and a big breath out. Again, inhale, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it out. Again, inhale, fill the chest, fill the belly with air. Exhale, let it all out. One more inhale. And exhale. And return to that sensation of your body resting on the earth. And you can slowly open your eyes as you return to this space. I'm so excited to introduce our guest today because she is someone I haven't seen in years. And I used to get to work with a lot more. So I'm super excited to be back today with Ariele Foster. Ariele is a doctor of physical therapy and the founder of Yoga Anatomy Academy, a no-nonsense, evidence-based resource for learning yoga anatomy and movement science. She runs an integrative physical therapy clinic, both virtually and in Washington, D.C. In addition to teaching online courses and an anatomy mentorship through Yoga Anatomy Academy, she has taught courses with and written for Yoga Journal on hip stability and fascia release before gracing the cover of Yoga Journal Australia in 2018. Ariele began teaching yoga in 2001. Her grandmother was also a yoga teacher. And if I remember, I think I saw on your website, your grandmother taught weekly yoga until she was 87.
Yeah, she did.
That is the dream. I actually was like laying in bed last night thinking like, I think I want to be like Arielle's grandmother when I grow up.
Indeed.
Thank
Indeed.
you.
She was a special human.
Oh, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to speak with us. I'm kind of excited to talk about movement as we age.
Yes. One of my favorite topics.
So, how did you first kind of make the shift from yoga teaching to physical therapy? I know you do both, but prior to physical therapy, I believe you were mostly yoga asana, I guess.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a carrot and a stick. The summer I graduated from undergrad, so in 2001, I took a very brief, at that time, it was a really brief yoga teacher training. It was like 4 days, but I'd been a really very dedicated student of yoga. And up until that point, I was like, I would go to classes, I would take notes. Even beyond that, I would go to like any regular class. And like, I was the person like drawing out the sequences after class or pausing
Wow.
on my mat. And then I lived at the Kripalu Center for maybe 3 weeks, I believe. And it was an immersion in the same way that a lot of 200-hour teacher trainings are an immersion. And so I again was like in yoga, asana, and philosophy classes, sometimes 5 hours a day, and then doing my volunteer work to pay for my stay there. So even that volunteer work had this seva component to it. Like in the kitchen, we would all circle up and remind ourselves of the mission, which was really to serve the guest, to serve the space, to serve the experience. So I came into yoga hot, 21 years old. It wasn't my full-time job in my 20s. For the most part, I was trying to kind of carve a career in the nonprofit space. But what I found was there was, in the environmental nonprofit space, number one, the subject was really heavy. Even back in the 2000s, it was really heavy and emotionally draining to talk about climate change all the time, or environmental justice issues, which were the two sort of things I was really, really gung-ho about. And so there was that emotional heaviness, and then there was that feeling of it being a really abstract thing that I didn't know in my lifetime if I would ever feel like I saw progress in.
Mm.
And in my mind, I thought, well, I want to do something where I can see that I'm making a difference, where I can see with my eyes, etc. And I injured myself around 2005, 2006. I think it was 2006. I had a pretty bad injury that came directly from a yoga class that I was in, an asana class.
If I remember, was
And
this your shoulder?
it was my shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've talked about this injury pretty extensively publicly. There's been quite a few kind of injuries or non-optimal feelings over the years after asana experiences. And but that was the first one. It was a big wake-up call. I went to see a physical therapist who had also trained in different myofascial release techniques. She was a pretty hands-on manual physical therapist. And she knew within minutes what was going on for me. And I was absolutely confused as to what was going on for me. And she was able to, essentially kind of cure me, so to speak. So taking me from a position where my arm was too painful to lift it to a place where I could pretty much lift my arm and move it all around within a half hour of her hands on, her thumbs and her elbows digging in to the right spot. And I just thought that was magic. So the carrot was this sort of joy that I experienced after seeing a really skillful physical therapist. And I thought, that's the skill. That's what I want to bring to the world. And yeah, it was perhaps even a bit naive, but that was a process that took me many years. I think folks don't realize that when they reach out. They're like, can we have coffee and talk about becoming a physical therapist? I'm like, there's a lot going on that you need to do before we have coffee. But anyway, it's not that I would turn people away, but it is a process. And so I didn't actually graduate until 2011 with that degree. It is a doctor of physical therapy degree. And I'm going to say something about this right now, because I do think even though it's been around for over 20 years in the United States, it still confuses people. So a law degree is a 3-year Juris Doctor, and a PhD is a research academic doctorate. But there are these things called clinical doctorates. And you can get a clinical doctorate in nursing, you can get a clinical doctorate in pharmacy, and they essentially just mean that embedded in the program are the types of things that would help you be a more autonomous practitioner. And so what that means for physical therapy is that we, in theory anyway, compared to when the program was a master's degree or when it was a bachelor's degree back in the 80s, that we have more skills to be able to differentiate when somebody's having a true musculoskeletal condition that we can differentiate versus some kind of red flag that would indicate that this elbow pain or this shoulder pain or this chest pain is something that is beyond our scope of practice. So in theory, that clinical doctorate degree gives us not only more practice with patients before flying free into the world, but it also gives us more of the lens through which we can catch the red flags and the yellow flags and send people to the appropriate caregivers. And what that has enabled is for most physical therapists in the United States have what's called direct access. So you or I could walk in off the street without a prescription from a doctor and get treated for our back pain. So in theory, that's the way it works. I know that different physical therapy centers still require, and different insurances still require, a prescription before you get started. But in theory, it improves patient outcomes in a lot of ways. Um, so back to your question. I was always teaching yoga part-time, sometimes a little full-time if I was between jobs, but I was really gung-ho about it. I would teach 5-6 days a week throughout my 20s. Then when I hit 31, I got my clinical doctorate. So 10 years after I started teaching yoga. And the last 11 years has been really a whirlwind of teaching and practicing physical therapy and starting my own physical therapy clinic. Pre-pandemic, I was traveling all over the East Coast and sometimes internationally to lead retreats and to lead workshops. And it's settled down a bit for the moment, but I'm really excited about the online offerings that I have right now. So thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. So, when you were talking a bit about your journey, you referenced asana. Do you mind explaining for there's probably a lot of people listening who don't know the difference between yoga and asana?
Absolutely. So let me initiate this conversation by saying that there will probably be times where I use those two words interchangeably.
And that happens a lot.
Yes, I am trying to catch myself more and more because to me, it feels distasteful on some level, but even on a deeper level, almost disrespectful to use the word yoga the way that it's used in popular culture. And let me give an example. So I know I'm not flexible enough. I should really do more yoga. You might hear this from like a friend of yours or a runner or something like that, someone who's an athlete. And that might not be it at all. Like they might just need what they're talking about is stretching, and stretching is not yoga. So yoga asana is the word for poses. And yoga poses are kind of what we have come to know as yoga. But yoga is actually a pretty rich tradition that prior to the turn of the century, the last one, prior to 2000, so 1900. So prior to the year 1900 or the year 1880 or the year 1860, something along those lines, yoga meant something very different than asana. Asana was a tiny little fraction, like less than 1%, but it has become 99% in the public imagination right now. So when I was speaking earlier, I said I injured myself in a yoga class, and I quickly corrected myself and I say an asana class, because that was a class that indeed probably had some philosophy in it, but it was primarily about conveying the teachings of yoga poses, yoga asana.
Thank you so much for clearing that up. And that's something even just from like the way I've noticed your wording of it, I've been trying to catch myself in the referencing yoga asana as more of that asana and recognizing that yoga is so much more than what we see often in the West, and that there are 8 limbs to this practice, and that the asana is just one small portion of it.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
So, how did becoming a physical therapist in your experience with physical therapy change your perspective on the asana practice and the way you teach it?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that it's continuing to change.
Mm.
So, what I have noticed when I was in school, I started to get really fascinated by more specific alignment based teachers. At that time, I was primarily Kripalu trained, and I studied a lot of vinyasa. And I became more and more interested in Iyengar and Anusara yoga at that time. I initially kind of used my DPT, my physical therapy background, to, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, but I think unlock a lot of poses. I was like, oh,
Mm.
I actually know now how to get around certain things and how to make certain parts of my body contort into these shapes. And I was able to teach others how to do that as well. And I did that for a few years, and I was I think there was a joy in that, I was sort of unlocking experiences for people and for myself that I just never knew I was capable of. At the same time, I started to notice that my body had more and more aches and pains. It was sort of like a whack-a-mole situation. The paradigm of the yoga student, the dedicated yoga student, is that, oh, I must be doing it wrong because yoga is good. Yoga is healing. I need to practice. I'm not dedicated enough. It's because I skipped Monday, Tuesday. It's because, I don't have a guru. It's because I don't have one teacher. These were genuine thoughts that were going through my head at that time.
I've certainly had those thoughts as well.
Yeah. Now, the shortcut, the quick version is that today I think a lot of that is baloney. I think that there are some major paradigm shifts that we need to have if we're going to be honest with ourselves in the yoga community. And one of those is that no, not all yoga is good yoga, quote unquote. Asana is a very, very specialized movement, which I know you and I are going to talk about today, that has limited functionality. Now, the function for you and for me has been that we have found value in the spaces of yoga that has been multi-layered. So one of them has been sort of, we'll call it like, wiggling in our body into new creative shapes that sort of has this feeling of clearing out the cobwebs. So there's absolutely that. There's a physiological layer that's happening at the same time where you are likely kind of kicking in some endorphins that give you a rush of good feeling. And certainly, I'm not saying this is all the experience of all yoga students, but certainly there is a meaningful percentage of the yoga practicing population, the asana practicing population, to correct myself there, that is a little bit addicted to the feeling of stretching. So you're stretching and it, initially, like the first time anybody stretches, they're like, this sucks. This is not fun. And then you start, but if you're doing it in an environment where you look around and you see other people who have sort of unlocked some really beautiful shapes or seem to have their ish together, like on some next level stuff, and it seems to be related to how they're stretching, you look around and you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll stick with this. And then you too start to feel that sort of good vibes from the stretching. People can get a little bit addicted to stretching inside or outside the asana context. And so my teaching went from that sort of, let me kind of pack in targeted alignment cues, targeted unlocking cues, and being fascinated by that trajectory of quote unquote advanced poses, to starting to get a little bit more therapeutic and discuss some of the things that we weren't doing so great in the yoga community. And I think now I am in a place in my own body where my own physical practice has changed so much that I believe that my role right now is still changing, but I'm kind of breaking down a lot of maybe misconceptions people have about their body from yoga. I'm doing a lot of myth busting these days, or a lot of paradigm shifting these days, because I have been so deeply embedded in the yoga community for 21 plus years now that I really am alerted to the many small insidious ways in which we fool ourselves about things. So it's an awkward place to be quite honest. But that's the arc of what's been going on for me. So if you want the nitty gritty, a lot of my body weight movement practices these days look like strengthening. I am much less interested in stretching than I ever was before. And that there's a layer of that that's very personal to my body and what my body needs. But there's also a layer to that that's very evidence-based and could be generalized across my cohort of women in their 40s for sure.
I remember that a lot in your classes, that in your workshops, that there was this definite emphasis on strengthening and functional movement in the practice versus that bending into everything, that kind of contortionist stretching that can be commonly seen in an asana practice. So, for those who don't know, do you mind explaining what functional movement is and why it's important?
Yes, I'd be happy to explain. So I'm going to give a little bit of the behind the scenes of like what happens inside the mind of a trained physical therapist.
Love
So in the
it.
United States, physical therapists are trained, at least in our school. So what you do out of school could be one of 1,000 paths, but at least in our school, we have to kind of understand the overall structure of the US healthcare system. And within that, one of the main insurance providers is Medicare. Medicare is the insurance provider for the majority of Americans over age 65, including, my parents. And Medicare is not interested in me training Holly to run her first marathon. They don't care.
So
I
sad.
could do that. I could do that, but that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in me making sure that Holly can cross the street safely. So that would be like, if we've all experienced that seeing somebody cross the street at like such a slow pace that it's a little dicey, right? So speed of walking would be a functional community mobility thing. Being able to bend over and pick something up is functional mobility. It's like functional activity that you have to do on a daily basis. Most of us do. Being able to dress yourself, being able to walk up and down stairs. It kind of depends on what your function was ahead of time. It's not that you're going to take a 25-year-old professional athlete and tell them that their function is crossing the street at a reasonable pace. That's not true. Their function is, getting that plyometric capacity to hit the ball in the net. I'm not even using the right terms there. Dunk the ball in the net.
Sports.
Right, like smack it. So yeah, making fun of my excessive yoga background that has not paid as much attention to sports. But, function is a really like measurable thing.
Mm.
And what I see happening, it's a measurable thing that has a direct impact on your quality of life. So I would say function is like for me being able. I'll give you a more concrete example. I think will probably relate to more of your audience. Right now, I'm sitting on a yoga bolster. My knees are up, kind of by my elbows, and this is a comfortable sitting position for me. I happen to have a chair, but I don't yet have a desk in my new office space. And so I functionally pretty much have to get on and off the floor on a daily basis. And I need to be able to sit in a variety of positions just based on like the accoutrements that I have around me right now, right? Like the furniture that I have in my new apartment. So there are 43-year-olds who can't get on and off the floor for whatever reason, whether they're just deconditioned or they've maybe actively not taken care of themselves, or their primary thing was bar and bar never took them down to the floor. Like that's primarily what they've been doing, or cycling. And, you can be athletic and capable and still have limited function. But what I think is really interesting, I think where you're going with the conversation today is how the word function or functional movement has been used a little bit broader than the definition that I just
Yeah.
gave. So one can take something like the practice of asana, yoga asana, and make it more functional. That is possible. But I wouldn't ever label something like functional yoga teacher training. And the reason for that is because most yoga poses have nothing to do with the activities that are required of your daily life. So outside of a yoga class, you might never ever get into a shape that looks like Warrior 2 or Warrior 1 or, the splits, Hanumanasana. Like these are poses that there are very few poses that are truly genuinely practical. Even chair pose, the way that chair pose is mostly taught, has nothing to do with how you actually get in and out of a chair, or has very little to do with that process. So I think that's a misnomer. I think the word function became very trendy in the last few years and got adopted and picked up on social media. And it's lost some of its meaning, at least in the public space. There's also these functional medicine practitioners too. That's a
Ooh,
whole
that's a good one.
yeah, but just in the case that your audience is interested, I think as long as the outcome is about the patient or the student or the individual, like living their life to the max, being, excuse me, safe and comfortable and having a high quality of life, that is functional.
Mm.
When it starts to be things that at the end of the day, the client, the student, the patient don't notice a difference in, that is not functional. So I could, let's say I train myself to wrap my leg around my head. One could argue the functionality of that it is functional in the in the sequence of Ashtanga.
Mhm.
It is not actually functional for anything outside of that. It will not improve someone's quality of life on any level other than that self-satisfactory feeling of kind of making it to the next step in that sequence, in that series. Um, so yeah, I think it can sound really harsh the way I'm speaking about this use, but it really is extraordinary how overused this term is.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying is it's how it can improve your daily life and the functions that you want your body to do on a daily basis and how that's going to look different for a lot of us. Like one of my private clients was saying, like, yeah, right now I'm the only grandparent who can get up and down off the floor with the grandkid, and like how proud she is of herself for that and wants to keep working on movements that are going to enable her to do that. So, and that could be totally different as for a different person you're working with might have a totally other functional movement that enhances their quality of life as well. So, how do we like keep our bodies up with different functional movements as we age, because our bodies are always changing, and as we're entering like our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, our 60s and on, like what you could do in different decades is totally different. What you could even do in different days is totally different. How do we kind of know when to adjust our bodies and our
Yeah.
movements?
Oh, there's so many elements. But first of all, I love that grandma who can still get on and off the floor. That is my aspiration. I used to say stuff like, oh, I want to be doing yoga into my 90s. And then I realized that what I was saying was, I want to be doing these fancy poses when I'm, in my last days on earth. And that's not actually true. I want to be healthy. I want to be vigorous. I want to be getting on and off the floor with any potential grandkids or other people's kids. And I just want to be robust, is what I want.
Yeah.
And I think it might be helpful to kind of preface this little segment of our conversation with a learning concept. Like at my heart, I'm a big old teacher and I just
Let's
love
hear
teaching, and I'm going to teach,
it.
teach, teach. So this concept is called specificity of training. If I become an excellent basketball player, there will probably be quite a bit of transfer, like quite a few skills that will transfer over to playing something like baseball. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be any better than a 9-year-old at hitting a ball with a bat, because I have not specifically trained to do that. So specificity of training is essentially a really important concept that folks lose out on. or that we miss out on somehow. We think that because we've gone to pickleball for the last 2 years, that we are in the best shape of our life, and that could actually genuinely be true because of the different component parts of pickleball. I have to confess something: I haven't yet played it, so there's a
Never
lot that
played
I'm
it.
ignorant about. I want to. If anybody wants to invite me, please. I'm in Washington D.C. Please invite me. But I think that you know, that if you when's like a common thing that comes up with my patients is pain with walking. But if you are going to, you know, 3 to 6 yoga classes a week or participating in some kind of asana practice multiple times a week, and yet the last time you walked over a mile was you can't remember it, then your specificity of training is not particularly functional to tie everything together. And so, yeah, I have a patient right now who is a dedicated tango dancer, and she's been dancing she's in her 70s, and I love her and I want to be like her, but she could not she specified her training so much in Pilates and tango that she didn't have the capacity to do a hike, or a very flat hike. And she ended up hurting herself on this canal trail that was really flat. And it was like at the 2 or 3 mile mark. And so for somebody who thought very, very highly of herself, she wasn't actually able to get in and out of a chair without using her arms. She wasn't able to walk the distance that she wanted to walk. And I think that we're missing out on the basics. So one thing I would say is a really important, lifelong thing that everyone should be doing, no matter your age, is walking.
Mm.
Just pure walking. Now, if you're a runner, I'll give you a pass, and I'll say all right, fine, running counts. But yeah, walking is a much less respected activity than it should be in the fitness space. I am a fan of tracking steps, not in the sense that I want anybody to become obsessive about numbers or tracking or anything like that. But I'm a fan of making sure that you don't dip below a certain amount.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting less than 6,000 steps a day and you're otherwise healthy, you don't have any major health concerns, you really need to be ramping it up. And there is good data behind it. I don't have it at the tip of my fingers, but it is data that shows a lower mortality rate, lower incidence of cardiovascular events, and all sorts of other positive data. So the 10,000 number is a bit arbitrary, but below 6,000 is not arbitrary. And there does seem to be, as you increase the number of steps, there does seem to be an increase in value, in a decrease in mortality and other positive outcomes.
I love that because I do think
Yeah.
walking gets way discarded so often, where it's actually such a beautiful movement and it is working your body in a really sustainable and healthy way. And I think sometimes people won't even start moving because they feel like, oh, well, I'm not really working out if I'm not running or biking or doing something that's breaking this really big sweat. But that's not, in fact, true. It's still incredibly beneficial for your body, even if it's not that high intensity movement.
Yeah, what could be more functional than walking,
Yeah.
right? You got to keep that one up. So functional movement, walking for every age. I think, to get back to the question about what to do at different stages of our
Mm.
lives, I think there's a part of me that's wants to say, when you're a woman in your 40s or older, you should be strength training, but that's not actually accurate. What our bodies need, particularly our bones, what our bones need is um, both strength training, which is external weights, and impact. You can get a little bit of impact from walking. It's better if you dial it up a little bit more than that. But something like running would provide enough impact to build bone density. Um, Strength training has potential for building bone density via increasing muscle mass, and high intensity interval training would probably do that combination of things. The reason I'm focused on bone density is because of the many depressing things you learn in a medical type school, like physical therapy. There are a lot of statistics, there's a lot of different metrics in our bodies and our health that kind of slowly have potential to get better and then decline, right?
Mm.
And, one of the things that inevitably declines is our bone density. And this is related to, uh, a lot of the limitations in quality of life that happens with when we age. Let me put that a different way. So bone density, also known when you have low bone density, it can be osteopenia or osteoporosis. It can affect, I think the statistics are about 50% of women over the age of 65 or 70. I don't have the exact numbers with me, but I talked about it recently on a summit. And the way to counter that is not through yoga for osteoporosis. I hate to say it. The people who are teaching yoga for osteoporosis are so enmeshed in that paradigm that yoga is going to heal everything, that they're not looking at the real data, the collective, meaningful data that says this is what you need to do. And also the practical science. We know how bones are built. They're built with impact, and they're built with stress, which is
Mm.
like muscle stress. You have to have a certain demand on your muscles. You can sort of get that through body weight training, but it's not very easy. And it's certainly not going to happen in the yoga for osteoporosis classes that I have seen out in the world. I am just bursting somebody's bubble right now, but that's not where you're going to get your bone density. So you got to lift weights or do impact activities. And you
Hmm.
might be thinking, well, I can't do impact activities because of my knees or something like that. Well, you can walk, you can at a minimum walk, and then you can do strengthening within a pain-free range. Even that pain-free range, your squat looks like the most micro squat ever. It's better than zero, and you will build bone, you will build some muscle mass if you practice. And then from there, you're basically counteracting the decline. It's not just bone density that declines after age 40, but also our muscle mass declines. And so that's called
Mm.
sarcopenia. Nobody talks about sarcopenia, but sarcopenia is like just as bad as osteopenia or osteoporosis. We just don't talk about it as much. And it affects, I believe, my understanding is it affects men and women equally. Probably affects women a little bit more, but it is a big deal. So keeping on your muscle mass. And so the way I think of asana as fitting into an overall healthy, functional lifestyle now is we're not relying on asana as our fitness, as the maintenance for our body. It can help us continue to sweep out the cobwebs and to be mindful and to practice proprioception. But we should be lifting heavy things and we should be walking. And if you want to add in some kind of impact, whether it's jump rope or pickleball or tennis or something like that, like go for it. Like that's the stuff that's going to move the needle in an evidence-based way for your health going forward.
It sounds like a really wide range of things are needed for our physical health. I kind of am thinking of it in my mind as like when I'm eating food, I need to get my nutrients from a lot of different types of food. If I just ate like the same thing every single day, even if it was quote unquote healthy, I would probably be depleted of some really necessary nutrients. So it sounds like it's similar for movement. It's not just lifting weights all the time or running hundreds of miles. It's this combination of getting that muscle building, doing things that are going to keep that functional movement, that walking, getting something for your cardio, kind of encompassing a more holistic picture.
100%. There's a great thought leader, Katie Bowman, excuse me, it took me a moment. She has this phrase called nutritious movement and like
Mm,
taking your movement vitamins. And so there's a parallel there. But I also want to add this layer on that I think, again, coming from the yoga asana space into this different mindset shift, it's important to also do things that you love.
ooh.
I don't want to force anybody to walk around their cul-de-sac when it fills them with dread every day. Like that's not what I want
Yeah, we don't want it to be
someone
a
to do.
punishment.
Movement should not be a punishment. And I think one of the things that yoga studio culture, certainly a studio RIP like Project Yoga Richmond got
Yeah.
really dialed in very, very well. Because for those who don't know, PYR was a nonprofit that was very community based, did just a tremendous job of inclusivity and diversity in their yoga offerings. They created community and it made it like actually fun to show up, even if the stretching was kind of uncomfortable or whatever it was, or even if you looked around and everybody looked fancier than you. They made it fun. They created a culture where it was about the social connections as much as, if not more than, the physical movement or the meditative relief that you get. And so maybe you need a workout buddy. If you hear the idea of like lifting weights and it strikes fear in you, you don't know where to start, maybe reach out to me, and I'll be in 2023 putting together a lot of different small groups. And I think one of them will be a kind of let's start lifting weights together in our homes kind of group. And I also have a whole like rich library of 15 to 20-minute practices that I called mini strength sessions that I taught for almost 2 years that were basically yoga oriented strength training that you can do at home. And so nothing fancy, no dumbbells more than 12 pounds, but you could just basically like get these little nuggets of introductory strength training movement in a really, let's say, safe and yoga acceptable way. You could be barefoot in your home, on your yoga mat and get it, pump it out. So I have a whole library of those. Those are on demand right now as I'm not actively teaching it at the moment, but I might get back into something like that in the future.
I definitely recommend anything that Ariele teaches as well. Like, always changes my practice when I take one of your classes.
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, those are fun. Those are part of the whole like on-demand library at Yoga Anatomy Academy. So you would also get access to like the yoga classes I've been teaching in recent years there.
That's awesome. So, how do we
Yeah.
kind of know when it's time to change up our movement routine? I kind of notice, like, definitely within myself, I get really structured, and I've had to adjust this personally of like the amount that I used to run. Like when I first started running, it was great and it was super sustainable. It made me feel good. Now as I'm getting older, injuries are happening. My energy level is adjusting. I can't move that amount in that same way anymore. So, how do we kind of know when we need to adjust our movement routines and how to let it change before it's too late, before there's like an injury or a serious pain that's kind of telling us, okay, now you listen?
Well, there's a couple things. One of them kind of goes back to that concept of specificity of training.
Mm,
So if you grew up, for speaking to someone, maybe there's someone out there who grew up running, you were on track, you ran every day throughout high school, and you have the background where you can keep that up without injury. Great. If you don't have that background, you really need to ramp up somewhat slowly. So I literally have a patient right now who injured herself because she started running 5 or 6 days of the week during the pandemic.
mm,
you know
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure she's
What
not
else are you
alone.
going to
A
do?
lot of what else are you
Yeah.
going to do? And so it was it wasn't obvious to her that that was what caused her injury. And I had to kind of spell it out to her, like, it's not the running. It's not that you were messing up, the running, but that there is this frequency. Your body didn't have the time to repair and recover in between. So whatever activity you choose, repair and recovery and rest time is actually really, really important. And I would say the harder you push yourself, the more important that is. So if you are someone who decides to pick up, let's say bodybuilding would be the classic example of this, or I guess powerlifting to be even more specific. So something where your goal is to go really, really big and quantitative and to push yourself more, to some like quantitative thing. You're going to need a significant amount of rest because each time you set yourself up, you're pushing yourself all the way to your edge. If your baseline is, let's say, 5 or 6 hour-long yoga practices, vinyasa-based yoga practices a week, we'll call that medium to low intensity, depending. And you're probably at that medium intensity level for 30 to 40 minutes or 45 minutes within that session. And so you can sort of take that and sort of apply it to like alternate with walking or something. It just depends. If you're really diversifying your movement, your rest can be active rest. So I could take a walk today, work out hard tomorrow, jog the following day, and I would be fine. But all of that is also premised on the foundation that I'm getting enough nutrients, enough of the basic building blocks. And specifically, the thing that I think that most folks coming from this wellness space are probably missing out on is protein. So I would really dial up protein. For example, if for those who are not vegan, if you eat 2 eggs in the morning, that's only 12 grams of protein. It seems like you're getting a reasonable amount of protein, but it's not that much. Taking up to 3 brings it to 18, so it's a little better. And then lunch, if you don't eat meat, you are, you're maybe getting less than 20 grams of protein in from your nuts and your cheese. And probably more like less than 12 grams. And similar with dinner. So like I'm pescatarian and I actually really have to pay attention and supplement my protein when I am being quite active. Otherwise, I feel really, really tired and I find it very difficult to recover. I get injured more often and I just don't feel as good. Like I can't push myself as much. I don't build muscle. So when I have supplemented with protein, I have been able to do a lot more. And it's not just me. Like there's actual hard data out there. You can go look up a protein calculator and see what you need. And it's way more than I ever thought, coming from this yoga background, thinking that, oh, we should all be veganish and just, sip on green juices all day. Actually, you're missing out on a really,
Where
really important basic building block.
how do you supplement your protein?
Um, I I get these protein powders,
Mhm.
and there's a really high quality company called Orgain. I don't have any financial
Mhm.
affiliation with them. Orgain, it was started by a medical doctor who had experienced and recovered from cancer. And so he creates these really clean protein products. There's a vanilla superfoods one that tastes really nice. And normally I'm a chocolate girl, but
Yeah.
I like their vanilla one. And I mix it with um, like cold water and ice. And so that in the NutriBullet, or like you
Mhm.
could do any blender.
Yeah.
I know it's annoying, but if you rinse out the blender right away, you don't have to scrub it so hard. And so that's the secret. And I do it after my workout because the cold makes the protein powder taste better for some reason and make
Mhm.
it creamier, I think. And drinking it after working out is better because your body is really nice and warm. It's not really that much more sciencey other than that, because you should really be contributing to your protein content throughout the day.
Yeah. So you kind of will do intentionally things nutritionally like eggs, nuts, cheeses, beans, those things, and pescatarian, like eating fish throughout different parts of your meals, and then that supplement you find to kind of sustain you enough.
Yeah, I could probably even do better with my protein, but
Yeah.
I think that that's a message that is really important to hear because I know a lot of folks, a lot of patients who come to me and just like, why do I get injured all the time? And it's a couple of things. It's ramping up too quickly. It's not resting enough. It's not having the basic building blocks. And for those of us coming from the yoga community, we trying to diversify our movements, knowing that we need to build up our movement vitamins, our movement nutrition, we are literally a little bit, I say this with all love and respect, a little bit brainwashed into thinking that, that we can just do the same thing every day without pause, without rest, without the concept of progressive strengthening and progressive training, because it's very difficult to do progressive training within the context of yoga or weights or without weights. And I've never seen anybody ingest a protein shake in a yoga studio. It was like at the gym taking these HIIT classes prior to the pandemic, like, what's that? Tell me everything. And that's how I learned. And then I got into the research and I was like, oh, how did I miss this?
I love a lot of what you were saying about rest and recovery as well. And as you were talking, I was just kind of thinking about, for our physical bodies, everything we need isn't in the asana practice. And it's not the whole practice, it's one small component of it. But if we think about the principles and practices of yoga as a whole, of mindfulness as a whole, if we're kind of looking at our bodies and our aging and our movement through that lens, I think it can kind of really help us with that, not being so attached to like, oh, I run like 15 miles every week, like this kind of ego driven, this is a part of my routine. And it can let us kind of practice that letting go of those attachments and looking at what does my body need right now in this moment and letting it evolve and adjust over time as we're aging.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm going to tell a story that's a little bit roundabout, but I think it's fitting into what you're saying. So most of us, we just want to feel good in our bodies. And we can get tripped up on either end of the extreme by focusing maybe too much on, oh, I don't feel like it today, I'm going to stay in bed. That's one end of the extreme. And there's nothing wrong with that at times. Or the other end is like, yeah, I got to keep up my, you know, whoop metrics or whatever. Like I got to keep up my running mileage every week. But sort of dancing with what is hopefully one of the skills that those of us coming from a true yoga background, not just an asana background, but a true yoga background, is being able to observe and discern and to practice the self-inquiry that is at the heart of yoga. So in that self-inquiry, am I genuinely in need of a rest day? Am I genuinely in need of a restorative practice today? And very often you will be, perhaps 3 or 4 times a week, especially if you're pushing yourself hard 3 times a week. And very often the answer will be the opposite. Like, actually, you're going to feel better. You might not have slept well last night, but maybe part of the reason you didn't sleep well is because you didn't push yourself
Hmm.
in the last few days. And so finding that balance is really an extraordinary lifelong practice of honoring ourselves, honoring the natural rhythms of life, um, and letting go of rigidity and rigid thinking when it comes to this experience of being human.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really love those words. Well, before we log off, how can people stay in touch with you and the work that you're doing? I know you have your online on demand library. What else is going on with Yoga Anatomy Academy and all the things you're doing as that can support us as we age?
Sure. So I have a couple of offerings. Through Yoga Anatomy Academy, I teach essentially mostly continuing education classes. They are geared towards yoga teachers, but they're also geared towards yoga students who want to know how to navigate this wild world of yoga from an evidence-based uh, lens. And I really, like you read in my bio, a no nonsense lens. I'm not about the nonsense. I'm about like understanding what all of the words that I'm using actually mean, like functional. Oh, another one I saw today, I was just looking up, sort of the zeitgeist around kneeling chairs, because I got one from, as a kind of a hand-me-down from my sister. And one of the things was like, oh, they balance the pelvis. Well, what does that mean? I want to know what that means. But we use these words all the time that like we can't define. So Yoga Anatomy Academy is all about clear teaching, sort of moving the needle into a more evidence-based lens in yoga. And the sad thing is I see a lot of yoga anatomy teachers out there who are not doing this.
Mm.
um, I also, and I would just go to that website because there's going to be a lag between us recording today and when this comes out. But go to that website, check it out, yoganatomyacademy.com. I've got lots of courses, lots of classes, lots of online on demand, and some live events that are online.
It'll be in the
And
show notes too, so you can
yeah,
just click
yeah.
below.
And there will probably be some freebies that I give away on that website, in addition to like some really thought-provoking blog posts. The other business that I run is my physical therapy clinic, and I am in the process of renaming it after my grandmother to bring it full
Oh,
circle.
I love that.
So I meditated on this for a long time. The new name is Welilo. My grandmother's name was Lilo, and so I'm combining wellness with her name as a way to honor her. And I hope to continue to build up my physical therapy practice. I see patients both virtually online in video format, and also in person in Washington, D.C., right across from the National Zoo. I have a lot of fun treating patients and working with yoga privates in this way, because I'm really keen to get to the root cause of everything. And it's amazing what we can get done in one session. I'm not saying I can undo 10 or 20 years of discomfort and pain, but I am saying like amazing things have happened and connections have been made. So that's really fun. And I hope to be able to, hire some other folks to do similar work, because I think that, this lens is really needed in the world of healthcare.
It's so important.
Yeah, so those are my two big projects. That website is going to be WELLILO.co. So wellilo.co. And I'll also have some giveaways over there, I'm sure, hopefully, when I get my act together on all of that.
Mhm. I'll make sure we have all these things linked for people to just click below and see. But thank you so much for your time and sharing so much
Thanks,
knowledge
Holly.
with us today. That's just going to keep our bodies and minds safe as we continue to move through this life.
Thank you so much. You are a delight, and I really appreciate you holding this space for this conversation. I think sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about these mindset shifts in the wellness and the yoga space, and I just really appreciate you holding the door open and allowing me to come in.
Thanks for being the person who opened it for me in the first place. Thank you for taking time to listen to the wise one inside of you today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast to help it grow. Until the next time, let's keep taking it one breath at a time.